Yes.
How's your mama doing?
It's her birthday today.
Oh,
Yes.
are you going to conjure again tonight, or you are done with it?
Let's see.
Rumble. Good tonight, blues.
So yeah, tomorrow.
Well, you know, we all have this shit. Some say you get over it.
I know.
I'm rolling around
Well,
my
it's really nice to see you again.
First of all,
And it's not like it's not warm yet.
Get some dog. And then I'm going
He'll be there at midnight.
Taught. Since the mid-70s, he's been applying lessons in poetics learned from SUNY Buffalo through civic journalism, critical writing, public librarianship, and a range of independent publishing projects. He is the founder and editor of House Organ, a letter of poetry and prose wherein he has been serializing his ongoing study, The Emperor's New Code, Ideology, Typology, and Mystery in the lives and works of Vincent Ferrini and Charles Olson. He is a founding member of the Lakewood Observer, it's Lakewood, Ohio, a newspaper, experiment in civic journalism. He was an associate editor for Contact 2, a poetry review and alternative press, a music magazine. He introduced and edited with Fred Whitehead the whole song, selected poems of Vincent Ferrini, University of Illinois Press, 2004. His two collections of poetry are Rock the Boat, Book 1, Oasis Press, 1998, and The Wandering Boy, Flow Press, 1979. A collection of essays, Captain Poetry's Sucker Punch, Guide to the Homeric Punk Hole, 1980-2010, will be published by Blazevox Books in 2012. He lives in Ransomville, New York. Is this book out yet?
Yeah, it just came out.
It came out? You have any copies with you?
Yeah, I got one for you.
Oh,
yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm very much looking forward to this book. Is there anyone here not...
Yeah, I actually, I'll give some copies out tonight.
Oh, wait,
If-
you have one for...
Yeah, okay, I will. Okay, yeah.
Is there anyone here not familiar with House Organ? 3 people, okay. So I have 2 comments to make, and the first is for you, who don't know this. It's an opportunity, the golden opportunity. Olson is a junction to find out for yourself. Isterin. Take a look at this magazine. It comes out 4 times a year. It's free. It's been around since 1993. Am I right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So 20 years. In my opinion, and the opinion of many, including I think Andrei Kudrescu just made a comment to this effect, it is certainly one of the most vital literary magazines on the American horizon right now. If I can just encapsulate quickly what I think what's going on in House Organ, it's a forum, sort of collective, a venue for what Michel Foucault calls la pensée du dehors. Pensée du dehors. It's a genitive construction, the thought of the outside, thinking of what is beyond, and then the thinking about it, thinking about the outside. Outside, I think a little bit as in thinking outside the box. The contributors to House Organ and the editorial vision is very much, well, not simply about thinking outside the box, but about being outside the box and the box and of culture and looking in, being outside, looking in, where in becomes a problematic concept. Are we looking at something? Are we looking at everything that something excludes? It's an object lesson. House Organ is an object lesson in the poetics of marginality. What certain poetic thought, research, work that gets pushed to the margins, how it gets, it's pushed away, off the radar, at the same time functions as a sort of frame, as a sort of encompassing discourse that organizes the whole. So check it out. Check it out. It's really a beautiful sort of off-the-radar magazine. The energy, the heterogeneity of its energies are, I think, what poetry should be about. And just along the same lines, I just highly recommend this book, Captain Poetry, Sucker Punch, which is a collection of Ken's work over a period of 30 years, 1980 to 2010. As I put it, blurb from Reagan to the Tea Party, and it's a really it's I mean, this is really the poetics of marginality, and few people can really talk about it the way Ken does. This is my second point. My second point is suggested by a comment someone made at a conference not very long ago in upstate New York. We were talking, and Ken was talking, sort of talking, and this guy said, "Ken, you're perverse. You're perverse in the good sense of the word." And I found that very telling. I have seen Ken being taken to task by people who just, they couldn't take it. They were sort of thought his comments, his lingo, his whole approach is off the wall, hyper or something, overthought, I don't know. And the point I want to make here, perverse means turned against the norm. I think in an earlier, maybe simpler time, it might have been understood as subversive, but I think notions of the subversive and the complicity in a dominant order that subversiveness is prey to, I think the perverse, the perverse in Ken's writing is not
Sorry.
it's okay.
Sorry.
It's not as eccentric and as unusual and off the wall as it may at first appear. In fact, it's very consistent with the whole larger discourse of what's been called literary theory over the past, say, 40 years, or not to mention French theory.
This is just the introduction.
Yeah, I'm introducing this.
Thank you.
Literary theory basically is philosophy setting its sights on poetry, on art, on literature, in an altogether different way. No longer as a master discourse that has compartmentalized knowledge and under the rubric of aesthetics is saying, well, here's what poetry does, along the lines of Aristotle. But philosophy looking to the poetic as the site where it sees itself reflected as incoherent, lacking a coherence that only art and the arsenal that art brings to play, the whole rhetorical, metaphysical, metaphorical discourse that art, symbolic, brings to play. It's all of literary theory is this turning of philosophy, this readjustment of the philosophical vis-a-vis, say, the poetic. Let me give you, and I think it's this brings to mind again Olson, who said art is the only valid metaphysic, the only twin life has. That is a very telling, very succinct statement, I think, of everything that's going on in literary theory, that has gone on in literary theory since the late 60s. Let me just, examples would be Derrida, just the same way Derrida will pick up on Heidegger and deconstruct Western metaphysics from beginning with Plato. Or Deleuze will pick up on Nietzsche and reevaluate, reconceptualize, schizoanalyze the legacy of Marx and Freud, Einstein, if you will. Ken is working in exactly the same trope, except his man is Jung. In simple English, Ken is a Jungian literary critic. Now, what this means, interesting, the twist is that he's not pointing to Jung as a framework or a system by which we look at the real or we cure ourselves of our neuroses. More specifically, I think what Ken is doing, he's taking the body of work of Jung's thought and applying it, infusing it into poetry, into literature, into these, so that it's a tool, it's a way to read. And what you do with the poem, what you do with the novel, what you do with whatever has been animated with the spirit of Jung is your business. He's not making any larger claims. He's taking Jung and turning it against the norm. In other words, it is no longer the master narrative. Poetry remains the master narrative, and Jung functions within that within that. So what we have in all these, what we have in Kant, as we have in so many of these theoreticians, is a form of commentary that is highly poetic. It's this amalgam, it's this weird mutation of the philosophic into the poetic. Commentary, poetic commentary, poeticized commentary as the sum greater than its philosophical or analytic sum. That is, I think, I don't know what he's going to say tonight about Vincent Ferrini and Dionysus, but I can assure you that it is perverse in the best sense of the word.
Thank you very much, Andre. Vincent Ferrini is an amniotic poet whose love for the numinous mother liquefies the polis. Born with the sun in Cancer on June 24, 1913 in Saugus, Massachusetts, Ferrini dignifies Luna. Inasmuch as the loco motion of the womb must be iconicized in a leaky opus, Ferrini's first will and final testament is located in an undifferentiated water world of primal symbiosis that can be fathomed in the Pleroma, his last book, published in 2008, a few months after he died. My first experience of Pleroma, the knowing, came when I inhabited my mother's womb for 9 months, and I was sensing everything that was going on in her mind and her feelings. Ensconced in Pleroma, then, Ferrini's knowing is relational and subjective, rather than logical and objective. With a palpating sense of the emotional body, Ferrini is always touching upon the madness inherent in the womb of the mother, which is the feral side of creation, perceived by Walter Otto in Dionysus, Myth and Cult. Writ large in Ferrini's universe womb is Dionysus, the god of madness, moisture, poetry, semen, wine, and women, whose images ground emotions in a biological, natural, and sacred fecundity. The Epiphany of Dionysus is the epiphany of the divine child, carrying in never-ending process a unifying principle within the human psyche, which by nature projects onto the polis the madness inherent in the womb of the mother. From no smoke to no fish, from 5 plays to Panacea, from the hiding one to Hermit of the Clouds, from the community of self to the Pleroma, all these back to the womb, Dionysian dissolutions figure emotionally into Ferrini's participation with the archetype of divine madness that transforms an individual into a collective. The madness, which is called Dionysus, is no sickness, no debility in life, but a companion of life at its healthiest. It is the tumult which erupts from its innermost recesses when they mature and force their way to the surface, declares Otto. Under the mask of Dionysus, Ferrini plumbs the collective conditions from which such madness evolves through divine child, human instinct, maternal anima, and Mother Nature. Thus, Ferrini's autobiography, Hermit of the Clouds, is a mad narrative of psychosexual poesis that incorporates numerous elements from the image and myth of Dionysus. At the beginning of Hermit of the Clouds, Ferrini is forced from innermost recesses to surface as subversive. I am thrust out of my mother's womb with a pencil in my left hand, Ferrini writes. The womb is a crazy-making matrix that churns and thwarts desire in the Ferrini family. I am kicked out. It's my father's foot. I'm in the way. I am blocking his entrance to that warm womb world. Paradoxically, the madness that ripples from the womb into Ferrini's poesis evokes a companion of life at its healthiest. At the conclusion of Hermit of the Clouds, Ferrini sounds an ecstatic note specifically related to the indestructible life constellated by Dionysus. Life is the poem. In the Bacchae of Euripides, the Maenads sing of the lactating earth in order to summon Dionysus. From his days as a child in Lynn, Ferrini recalls the feeling of the Mediterranean motherlode, entangling his soul in the milky flow of the Dionysian body. My mother, squeezing her tit into my excruciating earaches, proud that she knows some tricks the doctors haven't caught up with. An archaic sense of communalization is built around Farini's recognition that an umbilical connection to collective erotic energies binds his clan together. In faraway places, spheres are aunts and uncles who have strings coming out of their bellies I reach for. The ladies take in turn suckling me. Like Dionysus, Farini is surrounded by nursing mothers. While relishing the pleasures of his own suckling, Farini is also attuned to the milky madness that streams through the drive for pleasure in a sexually aggressive mother who ignites the seminal torch in her son Angelo Pappus. Here Farini spins the horny confession of his Greek friend Angelo into the archaic speech of Mediterranean myth, alive as ever amongst America's bottom dog immigrants. Farini from Hermit of the Clouds. My mother used to massage my body with oil, rubbing me into fires I thought were somebody else's. She did this because my growth is stunted, hoping to raise me into a tall youth. And naturally, my pecker rises, and she bends down, sucking my milk out, and we both enjoy this ritual. But instead of developing into her hero, I stay as I am, a little man. And to this day, I love to be milked by the ladies. This story aptly captures a countercultural Dionysian dimension wherein one might remain a little man and thereby resist becoming a hero. As Robert Eisner notes in Road to Daulis, Psychoanalysis, Psychology, and Classical Mythology, Dionysianism is the social alternative to the heroic pursuit of excellence. Dionysian festivity enlivens Lynn's community of shoe workers too. The red coloration that honors the god of dance and wine is shown in Farini's image of intergenerational stomping. The shoes of the shoe workers, bare feet and children stomping the wine and taking turns at the press for our red rivers flowing into the barrels of aging, Farini writes. The archetypal truth, so primary to the ageless solidarity which bubbles amidst festivity, is absorbed through the song and dance of Farini's recollection. For as Rafael Lopez Pedraza suggests in Dionysus in Exile, the Dionysiac dance has an ageless quality and can be danced by all ages, from a tiny child to an old person. There is no ideal age for a Dionysiac way of life. With this Epiphany of Dionysus, Farini has found the liquid shower hid in the grape, as expressed by Euripides in the Bacchae and translated so sweetly by Gilbert Murray. Earthly attraction and divine geography are Dionysian cultivations that Farini brings to the polis. An essential quality of the vine is geography, explains Michel Maffesoli in The Shadow of Dionysus, a contribution to the sociology of the orgy. It is thanks to this foundation that the vine can turn itself toward the sun and ensure symbolically the liaison of heaven and earth. In the garden, Farini is able to graft himself into the culture of the vine and indestructible life. Ah, how vines part and the cosmos is catapulted in. In the gold, Farini underlies the sudden doing of Dionysus in the green world. The suddenness flowers have startles the air with their fire and ether, as we do with what is ours, because we are the gardeners of each other. The sensual pulse of vegetation fills the gardeners in their mutual cultivation of each other. The social order in the green world hinges on the equilibrium brought to nature and culture by Dionysus. From Saugus to Lynn to Gloucester, Farini surfs the oceanic curl of the Dionysian wave, his opus drenched in emotions. Emotions, James Hillman tells us, are the way the gods flow into the soul, moving it to a more than human condition of excitement and fury, of sorrow and mourning, of folly and ecstatic desire. With William Blake in mind, Hillman reminds us that an emotion is a divine influx. Its gestures, a mimesis of divine archetypal images. Enacting a mimesis of Dionysus, Farini brings to the polis an all-inclusive sympathy for the life pulse that heralds divinity. In a short poem entitled The Interrogation, Farini writes, "Am I mad? Of course I am. The daemon is in me. I cannot see myself because I am a tongue in the service of the divine intelligence manifesting the divinity. Dionysus is burying the decaying body of psychiatry," announced Farini in his entry for Contemporary Authors Autobiography series published by Gale in 1996. Insofar as Farini was alluding to Hillman's The Myth of Analysis, 3 essays in archetypal psychology, a book that invites psychology to re-enter Dionysian consciousness, he calls us tonight, from a shade, to make an archetypal move that will amplify our emotional connection to the God in whom opposites coalesce and differences eclipse. Hillman is one of the many expositors of Jungian analytic psychology, whose perspective on theatrical poetics and the therapeutic process is directly related to the way that Farini achieves an archetypal perspective on his life and work in the polis. An archetypal perspective, as Hillman explains in Motion, holds emotions to be primary and irreducible, transhuman and ubiquitous, of major value and forcing unconsciousness on their subjects. From this archetypal perspective, emotions are the theme of earthly life. With a didactic push toward Dionysian moisture, Farini stresses that emotion is the destination of poets. In The Alchemy of the Poem, he urges that poets must become alchemists of human experience in its multifaceted situations to be effective in the deepest layers of being. The self is fine, and they are the deep sea divers of emotion. An archetypal perspective on Farini's Dionysiac experience of emotion in the polis gains descriptive usefulness in light of Jung's theory of psychological types. In Psychological Types, Jung summarizes 4 psychic functions that inform a typological basis for understanding the soul's alchemy. Under sensation, writes Jung, I include all perceptions by means of the sense organs. By thinking, I mean the function of intellectual cognition and the forming of logical conclusions. Feeling is a function of subjective evaluation. Intuition I take as a perception by the unconscious or perception of unconscious events. At another point in the book, Jung relates intuition to a definite state of psychic alertness whose origin, the subject, is unconscious. Clearly, intuition, with its sympathetic attraction to perception by way of the unconscious, generates an intensity of connective, collective vision that flows so consistently from Farini's imagination. The archetype of the divine child is the carrier of imagination, Hillman notes, in Emotion. The divine child archetype stimulates functions of feeling and intuition to flow together in Farini's imagination of the polis. The coupling of these two functions supports the psychological experience of life as a seamless whole, since the feeling function seeks harmony among all, and intuition embraces wholeness, as John Giannini explains in Compass of the Soul. This combination of intuition and feeling, suggests Giannini, is especially sensitive to emotional mistreatment in childhood. From a typological perspective, Farini's acute sensitivity to the child's claims upon the self and society becomes more intelligible through the dynamic coupling of feeling and intuition. With therapeutic insight, Farini thus proposes in Hermit of the Clouds, as the self is, so is the family, so is the child, so is society. Deeply embedded in Farini's opus is the image of the dead child. Along with the dead factories of the Great Depression, the image of the dead child looms large, especially in the first half of Farini's life, when the force of fatality was felt collectively. In Hermit of the Clouds, Farini records an anguished encounter with a dead naked infant at the dumps. In Photograph of a Starved Child Dumped in a Burial Cart, a poem from Plough in the Ruins, he somberly presents another image of the dead child. No one recognizes you. Who can know you now, child without name? Flesh, once elastic and human, born without being born, stitch in the quilt of the dead and dying, covering the earth. More personally, the image of the dead child in Farini's autobiography absorbs his baby sister Yolanda, and still later his daughter Deidre, who died of leukemia at 15 years of age. Dionysus is the god of initiation, Lopez Pedraza tells us in Dionysus in Exile, an initiation that allows us to see childhood within a tragic point of view. Occurring in his own childhood, Farini's crucial initiation into Dionysiac experience is revealed through the locomotion of an explosive stove that killed his baby sister and wounded him inside their Lynn kitchen. I am guarding my baby sister in her high chair by the stove. It explodes, kills her, gashes my arm and forehead, Dante under the stove, escaping, and I am crying my heart out. Dionysus, crying in terror, is an image of his deed as the divine child, the expressions of emotion in early childhood, writes Lopez Pedraza. This Dionysian initiation forever marks Farini with the deeply instinctual understanding that emotion grips the world through force upon the body. Out of Farini's tears, shed in a time of economic depression, comes an especially deep emotional connection with the divine child, as Lopez Pedraza shows, revealing the workings of Dionysus in the alchemical imagination. Lopez Pedraza writes, "It could be called a Dionysiac consciousness, that being close to death is close to depression. The moistness may be sensed in the tears, accompanying an emotion. Greek medicine saw tears in connection with the element of water. Moistness, in relation to emotion, appears in the alchemical imagination of tears as aqua lacrima." Having the image of the dead child stamped so forcefully upon his family environment, Farini resides amidst tears that serve the twice-born god of mystical death and rebirth. The theophany of Dionysus, says Otto, is a stunning assault on the senses, and its urgency is linked with the eternal enigmas of duality and paradox. As a result of Yolanda's death, Farini's psyche recoils from the devouring world of sensation and accelerates its intuitive reach toward the unconscious. The four psychic functions of thinking, feeling, and intuition, which Jung had theorized in Psychological Types, can now be imagined as a dismembering of Dionysus, as a cutting into the irrational matrix of sense data, so that mental templates might organize the traumas of life and death into cults, epistemologies, and personalities. In Psychological Types, Jung observes, moreover, that like sensation, intuition is a characteristic of infantile and primitive psychology. It counterbalances the powerful sense impressions of the child in the primitive by mediating perceptions of mythological images, the precursors of ideas. It stands in a compensatory relationship to sensation, and like it is the matrix out of which thinking and feeling develop as rational functions. Thus, by cutting into the senses, which Dionysus stamps first and last upon the soul's complex through intuition, Jung's topology accommodates the duality in consciousness and the paradox in the unconscious generated by this God. Yolanda's death initiates Farini into the invisible skin of emotion, trauma with a Dionysian accent. Again, the force of fatality in Farini's world is felt collectively, felt emotionally. Emotional events are at once apprehended by others which could not be so if the emotional inner world were only subjective and private, as Hillman notes in Emotion. Farini's articulation of Dionysian potentials in autobiography, drama, and poetry emerges, therefore, in response to environmental shock. The foundation of Farini's personality is traumatic experience, and as intrinsic properties of Farini's soul, moreover, the faculties of feeling and intuition meet the force of fatality, engage collectively with suffering, and thereby constellate the god. In this light, the coupling of feeling and intuition might be recognized as something archetypal, something linking back to the god for whom Farini carries tears to the eyes of the polis, primarily for the sake of transforming traumatic sensation into a mystical breakthrough for the social body. In vision seminars, Jung catches the emotional key that illuminates the coupling of feeling and intuition that Farini brings to the polis. Jung: I am sad. You are sad. We are all sad. So nobody is alone. Thus, the effect of the participation mystique is strengthening. It is really a return to a primitive condition. The Dionysians were seeking that effect, namely to be like everything else, to feel themselves in everything. Certainly, Farini's commitment to the wisdom of the participation mystique, a prelogical substrate of the psyche that substitutes for the law of causality, is not reducible to a conceptual appropriation from either Lévi-Brühl or Jung. Rather, Farini's commitment is intrinsic to the traumata that shaped his watery psyche to flow toward what he writes about in The Hermit of Clouds, the second seeing dead and the children. Like Dionysus, the participation mystique connects man with his animal nature. Farini's autobiography naturally extends images from his family's history to illustrate the reach of the participation mystique into both his imagination and his lineage. Approaching the terrible mother, he vividly unpacks the participation mystique that grips his clan. My cousin Annie visits Riano, and her grandmother, my father's mother, the river crone, tells him my father was saved from instant death by a chicken which opened his anus with its beak and gave him its breath. The animal will to live binds bare-bottomed infant, chicken, and crone together in breath and emotion. Within the participation mystique that binds animal and human life in Farini's clan, even the chicken is alert to the magical stakes involved with the life of the divine child. Farini is a grand feeler, wet with lunar water of intuition. His mother moon is in Pisces, the oceanic sign of the fishes in the New Age Dionysus. His intrinsic nature is immersive, oceanic, psychological, and sacrificial. During the time of the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact, Farini was forced to beat a Dionysian retreat from the titanic forces of communist revolution. Farini's account of his friendship with Marxist novelist Truman Nelson brings into focus the titanic revolutionary who will violently oppose Dionysus, Farini. Our friendship held, but a shadow crept into Truman's vision of me. And that was when, in his wry humor, he said, when the revolution comes, we will put you up against the wall and shoot you. And he gave his ha ha ha. Not long after that, I dropped out. The pressure of Dionysus in the emotional field that constellates between Farini and Charles Olson is registered initially in the Maximus poems. Because Dionysus is called Lysios, the loosener, as Hillman notes in his essay, Dionysus in Jung's writing, Farini has an archetypal way of loosening Olson's hold upon the polis. Olson feels utterly frustrated by the Dionysian complex that Farini evokes in the polis. In letter 5, Olson writes, as you are differently adither with that future so many of your pieces show, the looseness of the search, the Steiner mystique. Olson is reacting negatively to Farini's alien discourse and collective editorial engagement with The Four Winds, a literary quarterly he edited with David Meadow, Ilma Meadow, Mary Shore, and Margaret Farini. Olson raises a specific objection to the looseness of the search, a reference to a poem by Clem Graham, published in Four Winds 2-3. Now, Rudolf Steiner is a Christian seer from the spiritual world. Steiner's anthroposophy has been called the fifth gospel, one based on the teachings of the resurrected Christ. In Europa, a spiritual biography, Richard Selden explains that Steiner revealed quite a new possibility, to perceive the approach of Christ in the form of an angel in the etheric world as a brother to those in distress. According to Steiner, there is no tension of being mysterious in anthroposophy, but rather to bring to light the things which others have been trying to keep secret. There are two crucial concepts in anthroposophy. The first is the anthropos, the complete human being. The second is Sophia, the feminine goddess of knowing. Together, these two concepts form the gist of Steiner's spiritual science. Now, in Steiner's interpretation of the dismembering and rebirth of Dionysus, divine knowledge exists in humanity, but it's dismembered by the understanding that it is bound to the senses. The Titans, suggests Steiner, are the lower aspects of human nature. With Dionysus, Steiner proposes further that the dismembered divine force in human beings is reborn as the undivided wisdom that is identical with the Logos. Ether moves with Dionysus through threads and vectors into the polis. It pulses to mind and levels of consciousness. Ether fuels analogical and esoteric thinking about the visible and invisible that become features in the Dionysiac universe that Farini inhabits. So at the very best, the Steiner mystique helps the reader to cultivate an esoteric appreciation concerning how the archetype of ether is drawn as both Dionysus and Christ into Farini's art. Under ether, then, Farini becomes the connecting point through which collective ideological and psychological dispositions are being shaped into an enactment of the mysteries. With the Steiner mystique, Olson jacks Farini into a sign and signal channel amplified by a Dionysian out-of-body body politic. Of course, Olson spent the 40s trying to overcome the out-of-body body politic by stressing the man-eating titanic cannibalism of the Essex, writing in Call Me Ishmael. It happened to them this once, in this way. They separated the limbs from the body and cut all the flesh from the bones, after which they opened the body, took out the heart, closed the body again, sewed it up as well as they could, and committed it to the sea. They drank of the heart and ate it. The term Steiner mystique is intended as a political and spiritual insult. Recalling that during World War II, Olson worked in the Office of War Information, the reader understands that the Steiner mystique is the operative smear of a propagandist. Hence, there is a sense that the Steiner mystique resembles a kind of smear campaign, one that advances myth rather than fact. Again, Farini had not read Steiner with any particular attention. Steiner's universalistic system of the theory of Christ is discordant with the way in which Olson wants to construct the polis. What accrues to Farini is the problematic cultural capital that underwrites strange gods, rustling, as Jung might say, in the primeval forest of the unconscious. The Steiner mystique thus raises a German inflection, a merger of esotericism and politics, a psychological complex of feeling and intuition that celebrates creative preconscious life, and that leads, in the end, as Jung writes, to a cult of ecstasy, culminating in the self-dissolution of consciousness in death, which meant the conquest of material conditions. All these threads of irrationalism are evident in the way Olson weaves the myth of Apollo and Dionysus into the creative tension of Farini I, a complex poem of fraternal union and masochistic initiation that emerges in response to the death of Farini's daughter Deidre. With this poem, A Study in Ideal Form, written in 1963, Olson again approaches Farini through the birth of the first baby of the new year. The poem begins, "Into the pool at 5 a.m. to freshen the new year child. Dewsnap Farini was his name." Inasmuch as, in the poem, Olson writes, as women on a hillside in Greece rent Pentheus, Olson's own titanic opposition to the Dionysiac tendency in Farini can no longer possess him. For on January 2nd, 1963, the Gloucester Daily Times reported, with a photograph below the fold on the first page, first baby of the new year, Mrs. Ann Dewsnap, Folly Point, with her son Brian Eric, born 3:53 a.m. January 1 at Addison Gilbert Hospital. On the back page of the same edition is the obituary for Deidre M. Farini, who died January 1. By turns, Dionysus and Christ are entwined with the divine child suffering in Farini's soul. In IHS, he asks, "What is going on inside me?" With that weeping put there, I in this black womb, and they in their black tomb. O Deo, Deo, what art thou and where? The clash of the divine child with titanic forces is the first step into a Dionysiac process of life, writes Lopez Pedraza, who regards such as an initiation. From an archetypal perspective on academic receptivity to a Dionysiac process of life, it should be disclosed here for the first time that the Titans of the University of Illinois Press, who eventually published the whole song, selected poems of Vincent Farini in 2004, felt compelled to repress the book's original title, Life is the Poem, unable to imagine that the image of divine joy and primal power could be viewed in Life is the Poem. The Titans at the University of Illinois Press were convinced that such a title sounded too much like a Hallmark greeting card and could therefore reflect dubiously upon the serious enterprise of academic publishing. Like the Titans coming to dismember and devour the child Dionysus, this repression of Life is the Poem by the University of Illinois Press reflects the unavoidable myth that Farini's opus enacts across all fronts. In summary, these approximations of the Dionysian archetype that Farini brings to the Polis point to a dynamic and elusive cultus of belonging and emotionally packed presence that can all too easily disappear. Indeed, Farini's Dionysian vectors of communalization may well disappear from Gloucester as the titanic forces of economic development and neoliberal order launch another attack on the divine periphery of the Mediterranean within the fishing harbor. So as the titans of tourism would dismember Gloucester's fishing community, let us remember Farini's vision of divine organicity in the Polis by concluding sanely with a few words from the introduction to No Fish. The pitch is that only when we connect with the interior fishes are we discovering and extending life by the innate rules of the earth and thereby saving the self, the family, the city, and the planet. Thank you, Vincent. Thank you, everyone. We can open up to any questions, discussion, clarifications. I mean, was a heavy Dionysian download tonight. Maybe you want to have some wine and see what pops.
Ken, what I loved, all the time you were reading, I was thinking about what we're experiencing here in Gloucester, as indeed the Polis dissolves around us.
Yeah.
And we almost powerless.
Yeah.
Having fought for years and years and years to keep it coherent, we're almost powerless now. And I'm thinking, and suddenly you're so marvelously move into that dimension, which is what Farini had been talking about.
Yeah.
So I really want to thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you go back and you read No Fish, I mean, I haven't written on this yet, but read No Fish as a warning signal about the neoliberal order. Yeah. I mean, it's right there. It's a profound critique. And I mean, at that point, I mean, I don't think we really knew about the Washington Consensus. when he was writing that. But all you have to do is read that, and you will see this tension playing out beautifully in that collection. Yes.
Do you think you could have developed this talk without reference to Jung?
Probably not, because I look at I look at my heuristic or my hermeneutic is a fourfold archetypal hermeneutic. So what I do is I like to look at the way a personality complex channels language. What language is activated in the psyche of a poem. And I like to cut in through that. And I found that, the reason I came to Farini was because I was completely turned off by Farini originally. I had gotten rid of all of my books. It didn't appeal to me. Okay, the watery, Olson's critique of Farini struck me as, in terms of my own complex, my own undeveloped side. I couldn't connect with it. And I discovered Magdalene Silences one day in the bargain bin at Barnes & Noble in New York City. I picked it up. It looked interesting. I wrote a review. And I sent, Vince got it, and he liked it, and wrote back to me, and that was when I started to get involved with Vince.
Well, what was it in Magdalene Silences that turned you around from checking him off to getting interested again?
It was probably the esoteric Gnostic. It was probably the Gnostic grain, which would connect, in terms of my own particular complex. Which is the intuitive side, which is the right brain, the precognitive side. So that's my. I don't think I could have. There's no way that I could have approached the god Dionysus without coming at it through the lens of archetypal psychology.
Can the Gnostic approach lead us to Dionysus? I would think it would be the exact opposite.
I would say that there are two sides. There are two sides of that. Okay, there's the life and the death side of Dionysus, and there's the dismembering of the material within that black womb. You think about Zeus's thunderbolt going into Semel's womb, right? That's a flash of the noose. Okay, right. That's smoking the womb. Okay, so that for me, and when I say Gnostic, it's really just I look at it more as a mode of knowing, an intuitive mode of knowing, a kind of holistic mode of knowing that is more intuitive rather than sensate and textual.
I think of dismemberment and Gnosticism as a step towards transcendence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you repeat what you were trying to say about Steiner? I didn't quite get it.
About the Steiner mystique?
Yeah, it's not participation mystique, Steiner.
Okay.
Steiner mystique, you use that phrase.
Yeah, the Steiner mystique, Farini published a poem in Proteus. And in the letter 5 of the Maximus poems, Olson takes him to task for the Steiner mystique. And the Steiner mystique is part of this Gnostic, German, kind of disembodied, out-of-body politic that Olson slams Farini for.
I always thought of Steiner as being very pantheistic. I forgot about the Olson reference.
Yeah. So, there's certainly a pagan dimension, but the etheric Christ, and there's a whole kind of solar aspect with Saint Michael, And I mean, there's a whole aeonics of archangels and a whole kind of theosophical, angelic procession of time that comes with Steiner. So, and I mean, he's a Piscean mystic.
And I'm sorry, what was Olson's criticism of Steiner in regard to the...
Well, it was just a line that he, in letter 5, he just, the Steiner, it's the Steiner mystique. And he accused Farini of taking on I would say, possibly embracing the Steiner mystique. I think it probably just comes from the fact that Farini had published a poem in Proteus magazine, and Mary Shore had also published something in this particular issue of Proteus. So, I mean, there's a kind of a tension in terms of what was being brought into the Polis. And Farini had published his poem in Proteus, and that was Proteus was a Steinerian magazine. So again, that Farini published in this magazine. So I would say the inference would be perhaps by going out and publishing everywhere into this Steiner magazine. Olson had an objection to that in terms of Farini's practice. Yes.
I just have a question for Dorothy. I'm curious why you asked him whether he could have approached this subject or this theme without Jung, without using the Jungism.
Well, I can't say that I know, when a Jungian scholar, I'm not, but I do have some resistance to the idea of archetypes, and I feel like Farini kept evolving, and
I mean, Farini read Francis Wicks.
Yeah.
He had the whole shelf of Jung. He was reading Hillman. He was
Really?
absolutely,
James Hillman was-
absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. I mean, I mean, if you can read the subtext.
I know that.
The Jungian subtext is absolutely there. Okay, and then all I can say is. I mean, do you see Farini as a rational thinker? I mean, we take it as a heuristic. Okay, I mean, topology is a way of finding an orientation to human difference.
But why does it need to be a separation? Why? I mean, even by separating out rationality from other ways of thinking.
Because it's a descriptive heuristic for qualifying ways that we discern difference in our human experience. I mean, that's all it is.
It's I like the way you associated with dismemberment. That's a nice.
Yeah, I mean if you read Jung, he talks about the Amfortis wound. Okay, so you're getting that wound is coming in. So it's coming into the unconscious. Okay, and intuition is the first and the last of the faculties. So if you just imagine the snaky stream, okay, of the sensate pulsating world, okay. How is consciousness going to cut into that? How is it going to cut in?
In quadrants.
Rationality could be a construct also, is it?
Well, I mean, all I'm saying is there's a difference between thinking and feeling. And these are matters of description. They're matters of evaluation. I mean, all I can ask is, what doesn't check out in what I described tonight?
I'm just having a
Yeah.
dialogue. I'm
Yeah.
not saying
Okay.
I loved your talk.
Yeah. No, I mean it's
very challenging. And
it's I mean it is okay. I mean you can certainly object to the reductionism, but my issue is that otherwise the critical language is simply swirling in a language that doesn't have any connectivity to the way we actually regard the world. And this is a way of I mean, was there a tension between Farini and Olson?
Well, that's my question. In letter 5, you seem to be positing the Farini as Dionysus versus Olson as a Titanic figure.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering how do you see Olson's Titanic identity metamorphosing over time? Do you see it? Does he remain a Titanic figure?
Olson?
I mean, for you?
No, I mean, I would say that there's a dissolution process. I think in some ways Farini is a part of Olson's dissolution process. In terms of bringing feeling, bringing a relational. I mean, Farini was a kind of relational ground in Gloucester, okay, that he provided for Olson, which was the moisture, which was the feeling. I mean, if you think about,
Olson only, he calls him his only brother.
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, they were, so I mean, you have a great polarity. You have a Cancerian Capricorn polarity, astrologically, in the two. But I mean, I think that Olson, early on you could look at Olson's cutting of Farini as a kind of Titanic act. I mean, I think that the whole, and I haven't really completely formulated the Titanic dimension of Tartaros. But I mean there's a lot of archetypal dynamic. There's also a lot of Zeus in Olson. Okay, so these are all complexes that can be experienced in reading the poetry, and it's a way of achieving a kind of orientation for oneself. If you can hold a mythological analog and try to figure out if it means anything more than a name. What does it mean emotionally? What does it mean as an image? Where is it going? How is it relating?
I enjoyed your talk about Farini 1. I mean, that's a really kind of difficult.
Well, I'm doing it. I mean, I didn't. It's a very difficult poem, and I'm going to be doing. I'll be doing a full exegesis of that poem. But I mean, it's a fascinating poem. I mean, there's the whole issue of masochism is in that poem, which is also very Dionysian. The whole question of Nietzsche. I mean, I've got some great stuff on the poem, but I figured it was too detailed to kind of bring to the table tonight.
Ken, Olson fought in Farini that part of himself that he spent a good deal of his life denying. Splitting himself off from. And I would see it time after time in the conversations between the two men. That tension would arise. And Olson would many times write Farini off as irrational, and he would just say, Vincent, you're not being rational. And Vincent would say, I'm not rational.
Vincent's great quote was, whenever you got into an argument with Vincent, it was always, all I have is my feelings. That was it. That's the bottom
Right. That was the bottom. I mean, women don't want to know what you think; they want to know what you feel. I'm sure many of you. I mean, but again, I'm not saying that these are true. I'm saying that these were his measuring rods. Okay, these are the measures of the man that were our takeaway as he was bringing himself into our soul space. Okay, so how do you get a grip on these? You may not be interested in any kind of heuristic rule of thumb for figuring out where people are at. And that's cool, But for me, I've worked in organizations. I've seen how, this is, and I've taught people these tools, and it's a way of gathering a little bit of perspective on human difference, and it allows you to have a kind of cognitive map for describing some particular hotspots that may surface in the course of transacting a relationship. That's all. That's that's all. So is it valid? It's only as valid as much as you want to bring to the table and inhabit and animate those terms. And if the terms aren't coming alive, for you, that's okay. I mean, I'm not. I mean, it's only. I mean, this is like any meaning. I mean, we have to occupy the semantic space and inhabit those emotions. Yes.
Being a sort of emotional intuitive type, I was very touched by the tenderness in your talk about Vince. I mean, talking about the loss of his sister and the loss of
Yeah. Hey, he taught me a lot. Yeah. No, he taught me a lot.